Chapter 6. Blood. More blood. Whispers. Wheezes. Silence. The motion of unfathomed rage. Eyes torn in a discrepancy of confusion, hate, and sadness. An entire expression displaced into two factions of ecstasy and regret. Left dismantled two entities in two different directions, that of which they cannot return. Broken, unravelled, both fell to silence, only one to break it with a drop of steel to wood, a splash, a drip, and then the noise of the world continued. This short description was a moment in Takahashi Himora's life. He had an inkling his wife of 2 years had been betraying him with someone from her workplace, and had hired a private investigator to confirm his suspicions. Sadly, everything was true. Takahashi immediately surrendered himself to the police, as he knew the moment he grabbed the knife from the kitchen, he would be committed to consequences of his future actions. Moving forward, Takahashi was sentenced to life in prison with no hope of parole. Accepting this fate, his eyes fell to the angle of sad acceptance, and had stayed this way for 7 years of his prison sentence, until he was at the right place at the right time, when he saw the beauty and eminence of the moon's presence in the sky. Unlike prison, the light of the moon was not overbearing. It was silent, neither cold nor warm, but accepting, and welcomed Takahashi's sad eyes with no judgment. It was a mystery to him how 7 years had passed, and he had not given the moon or the sky a second thought. Remnant memories of his past life had flooded his eyes as they settled anywhere remotely quiet, and the Japanese prison was almost perfectly silent for most of the day, repeated for the course of the year. The prison would hold their own events to celebrate cultural tradition and the like, giving the men and Takahashi the opportunity to still feel human and close to society, separating them from their crimes. For an opportunity that gives them clarity and reflection on what life can be like once more. The event the prison was celebrating was in fact a moon event, where the prisoners would pound mochi in the moonlight in thanks for the rabbit on the moon. Not many men shared excitement for this event, but the people who did were very patriotic towards Japan, and Takahashi was a man that celebrated traditions and valued his country despite his violent predicament that placed him in prison. He had been a man that did things by the book. The prison lights glared upon him, and as his forearm and eyelids sheltered him, the flash of his wife's body and blood postured itself with clarity and image before him. Short bursts of stop-frame animation playing under his eyelids played out his crime over and over, the drop of blood more haunting than the last wheeze of his wife's body. Her last words, reflecting the hatred in his eyes, rang silent as the soft and slow movement of her lips spelled out the words. Her final gesture of scorn and disgust unwound by the end of time her soul had control. Only then, when her body laid still, when he could not tell her the pain resting in his soul, his eyes watered, and the screaming of his own voice rang true in his ears. I fucking loved you. The day of the event had finally come. Some prisoners held expressions of joy, and others were indifferent to the matter. Takahashi held a longing to see the moon again, or at least its light. The warden and officers rounded up everyone and brought them to the recreational grounds, where they all had seating arranged and a small stage for the mochi-making ceremony. The moon immediately made itself known to Takahashi and all the other prisoners. Holding a gaze that would commonly be mistaken for someone smitten by love, Takahashi would not let the moon out of his sight. Prisoners and officers alike looked at him with the assumption of madness and an ounce of curiosity, avoiding him as they made their way for the seating and stage. "Takahashi!" shouted a prison officer. Takahashi couldn't respond in his trance, his heartbeat growing, his retinas pulsing with the moon's light. The veins in his showing skin surfaced, and then the light from the moon entered his orifices and disappeared like light entering a black hole. The heels of his feet began to lift up, and his arms twirled in a confused madness, his head rotating as far as the neck could move in every direction. The moon's light kept entering his body. The prisoners ran away from his direction. Others tried to ground him with pure force, but as he faced them, they were pushed away. Slowly, he raised up into the sky, the moon's light consuming him consuming the moon's light. He lifted so far into the moon's presence, the men below saw his outstretched silhouette in front of the giant white circle, before suddenly he vanished. The feeling is hard to describe, but it's as close as being born again. The soreness in the eyes, adjusting to the environment for what is the first time. The first coating of saliva on the throat, and the soreness and unknown temperament of a body that doesn't feel its normal self. Takahashi's eyes opened in a sequence of various blinks, and then the vibration of the air hit him square in the eyelashes. He defended himself with his arms as if he had been attacked, and with a quick peek of his surroundings, he confirmed nothing was there. Then he was struck again, this time in the throat, and his breathing became faint and unbalanced. While struggling with his surroundings, a young woman approached him dressed in a long gown that reflected the sky above with animosity towards solid colour. She saw him struggling. Her pace quickened, and with a soft hand on his back and soft word in his ear, she assisted him with developing a rhythm for the vibration in the air. Takahashi, when he could keep his eyes open, was stuck in amazement at the beauty and softness of this being. He couldn't quite put his tongue on it, but he knew she wasn't fully human. There was a difference. The being in front of Takahashi was shorter than him by 3 to 4 inches, putting her at roughly 5 foot. Her body was slender, but held a pear-shaped figure. Her arms and hands appeared to be the softest thing Takahashi had ever seen. Her face was a mixture of a mature woman with the appearance of innocence from a younger version of herself. A complex appearance indeed, but her eyes were the lightest of brown, and slightly larger than eyes Takahashi had ever seen. Her nose was small and stubby, but perfectly crafted, and her lips gave her words a curvature to her pronunciation and tone, which made words and sounds softly curl into his ears with a grace he had not yet heard before. With a face of wonder and at times an exaggerated struggle to sync with the air's vibration, Takahashi stood looking at this being struck. "Hello there, Takahashi Himora. My name is Daffilea. I am in service of the king, and I am here to collect you and bring you to his majesty. Would you please follow me?" Her hand kindly extended to the horizon, to which Takahashi finally took in his surroundings. A world he had not seen before. The sky was something of prominence. It was a sea of colour, but it was not peaceful, it was violent, and offered eruptions of motion and collisions that brought forth new colour combinations, flat colours, mixed colours, faint colours, and even shades Takahashi knew not existed, filtered through his eyes. The world was moving in a different way, down to the creatures smaller than a fingertip. The vibrations in the air that Takahashi had initially struggled with, in collective with the natural order of what he was seeing, made sense. The vibration gave a balance to the movement in some weird way. "Where am I? Who are you? This is not Japan." Takahashi just began spurting out questions, some of which had not even crossed his mind. "I know this is difficult for you. Please, on behalf of the king, accept my apology for the initial confusion. However, I promise you safety and answers at our king's palace. That is the best I can say," said Daffilea with a soft smile. Takahashi looked Daffilea in the eyes, and within the lightest brown of her eyes he saw the reflection of the violet sky above, and watched it change and unwind into peace and solidarity. Checking the sky above, it remained violent in colourful outbursts. He then decided to keep his mouth closed and followed her. "Thank you," Daffilea said, turning back to him. Takahashi nodded in return, and they set off on what looked like to be the longest walk of his life. What a strange place. Takahashi's eyes were everywhere, front, back, to the side and above. There was so much information he was taking in, so much he was seeing. It was like a fantasy film, but he was the character and was living in it. Their walk was quite a journey, and Takahashi had been taking in his surroundings quite well. The people or beings, he wasn't sure which, seemed so happy. There was no negativity or atmosphere between people. There was just harmony. The journey was over quicker than Takahashi expected, as before he knew it, they were at the palace gates, where a guard let them through, and just when he thought he had seen it all, he was amazed once more. The open space, decoration, ornamentation, furnishings, architecture, and smell were just some of the many things that amazed him. Everything was new to his eyes, like he had just discovered a new mindset. He had no choice but to just look and absorb. Everyone was pleasant to him, unknown to his past discretions, and that made him feel a deep sadness, one solely dependent on the shame accumulated from his crime. One more thing that made him feel a deep sadness was the apparent relationships of men and women that were surrounding him. There was an orphan resentment towards a happy man and woman spending time together, working together, or just being near each other. There was a constant destructive fantasy of betrayal that lingered around any man and woman that shared a space or area together. The idea that every woman near a man would betray him, and a man next to a woman whose heart may belong to someone else would pour poison into her ears and tear her from the man that loves her with all his soul. Daffilea sensed the tension coming from Takahashi and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. She watched him look her in the eyes and watched the rage outlining his eyes settle in relaxation. With a smile, she gestured a kind hand to the direction of a set of stairs, of which they were completely overpowering to look at in terms of size and destination. Going up the stairs, his eyes wandered up the space the stairs took up. Looking up, he saw an eternal-looking spiral that seemed to end where the sky began. "Don't worry, Takahashi, we won't need to go that far, although the king resides quite high. The room we are going to is only 3 floors up," said Daffilea in a comforting tone. Takahashi felt a building tension in his body, as his interpretation of royalty is that an insult could be deadly. He had no idea of the royal customs here, how to act, how to even talk, and such thoughts were easily read by Daffilea, as like magic. Just be yourself. Horrible, nice, evil, good. None of that matters. However, if you physically hurt the king, that will not be forgiven under any circumstances. Is that all clear? When Daffilea mentioned harming the king, a cold presence shadowed Takahashi and sent a chill over his body. This was a moment of animal-like fear that washed over him, and within a blink, Daffilea was her soft self again, with light brown eyes that pronounced calmness once more. The time had come, and the final step, which seemed elongated more than the rest, loomed upon him like he was crossing a line he could no longer cross back from. The third floor of the palace was just as animated and bewildering as the rest of the palace, but it held a silence different to the rest. This silence was calming without any given action within it, and as Takahashi walked down the long hallway, he felt lighter. His body tingled with a sensation he had not felt before, an excitement, a body's retaliation to danger. Perhaps even the idea of the unknown is what is causing such reactions, but either way, he had no idea how to control himself. The door that they were approaching was indeed closed and looked extremely heavy. With a polished look, it shined and reflected Takahashi's final expressed emotion before facing the king. It was for the first time in almost 10 years, a smile. Not just any smile, it was a hopeful one. One hopeful enough for him to keep moving forward with his life, and strong enough for him to forget his past, who he was, and focus on the man he was or could be now. In this moment, would he approach the king wearing his past as a default definition of himself, or would he be a man that accepts he made a mistake that he can never atone for, but would and is willing to live the rest of his days helping others for the better in order not only to be forgiven by others, but to forgive himself? One question did strike him and remain. Why am I here?